Welcome everyone to another week of Ramban ala Parsha. This week we have the great zchus of reading Beshalach, the center point of Beshalach being Shirat Hayam, even though we're not really going to deal with that directly. Sometimes when you look at Rambans on the Parsha, themes emerge. I don't know enough to say that was the Ramban's intention, but I think when an idea gets in your head, it reverberates sometimes throughout the Parsha. And here I want to point out two themes in this week's Parsha. One is, not unique to the Ramban, but you would identify with the Ramban, and that's his commitment to morality and seeing requirements of the Torah to be a certain type of Jew, even when they're not specifically commanded. The second, I think, is even more interesting, and it starts with the beginning of the Parsha. Says the Torah at the beginning of Beshalach, Vahi Beshalach parat ta'am v'lo nacham Elokim derech eretz plishim ki karov hu. Right? He didn't take us derech eretz plishim, even though that was the shorter, more direct route. Why? Ki amar Elokim pen yinachem ha'am birotam milchama v'shavu mitzrayma. Instead, vayasev Elokim et ha'am derech hamidbar yamsuf v'chamushim alu Bnei Israel me'eretz Mitzrayim. V'chamushim is an interesting term, and all the Mefarshim comment on it. And what does it mean? Right? So Rashi says, and it's generally understood that way, v'chamushim is to be armed, right? And so the Ramban explains, Lomar, ki af al pi shehisev HaShem otam derech hamidbar. It's true. God did not take them the straight way, derech eretz plishtim, because that would have involved an immediate war. But says the Ramban, it's true, even though they're going on a circuitous route, hayu yirayim pen yavo alehem plishtim yoshvei ha'arim hakrovot lahem vayu chalutzim. Right, they were still afraid. They're not going derech eretz plishtim, but it's not such a big area. The plishtim can still attack them, and so therefore they left chalutzim, which is, I think, another way of saying armed. Kimo hayotzim la milchama. They prepared for war, even though God was making it easy on them by taking them another way. But now it's the second shot in the Ramban that I'm interested in. V'yesh omrim, another possibility, says the Ramban. And it's the Ibn Ezra. If I had to find another theme in this week's Parsha, it's the Ramban agreeing with the Ibn Ezra, even though you don't find that often. V'yesh omrim, shesiper hakatuv sheyatzu biyad Ramah v'chashvu lihiyot geulim. It's not necessarily that they were armed. This pshat doesn't deal with being armed or not. But it says the Ramban, they viewed themselves, it's how they left Mitzrayim. V'chamushim alu Bnei Israel me'eretz Mitzrayim. They viewed themselves as being redeemed. V'lo halchu kidmut avadim borchim. Right? The Ramban is imagining how did Yetzias Mitzrayim actually play out? And presumably there are two ways for it to have happened. There could be, let's get out of here quickly. We forget this, but it's important to remember, we have only 3 days, right? Moshe Rabbeinu originally said to Paro, let them go for 3 days and we'll worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The implication was they would come back. And so there's that way of going, let's just get out of here quickly. But says the Ramban, no, v'chamushim alu Bnei Israel me'eretz Mitzrayim sheyatzu biyad Ramah v'chashvu lihiyot geulim. They saw themselves as being redeemed, meaning they had no intention whatsoever of ever coming back to Mitzrayim. V'lo halchu kidmut avadim borchim. They weren't like slaves running away. They were leaving, in a public, I would say almost triumphant way. You can't stop us even if you wanted. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's on our side, and we're leaving in broad daylight, and we're leaving proudly, and we're leaving forever. Okay, so that's the Ramban's pshat on Vachamushim, and I think obviously it's fascinating in and of itself, but it ties into his pshat on another pasuk, which is slightly more controversial. Let's go on to Perek Yud Daled, the next Perek, pasuk Hey. So says the Torah, Vayugad lemelech Mitzrayim ki varach ha'am. It was told to the Egyptian king that the people had run away. Now, it wasn't told to the Egyptian king. The Egyptian king had told Moshe during Makas Bechos. He ran away and said, get out. Say atah b'chol am Hashem b'raglecha. Leave. But when they told it to Paro, Vayehafech levav Paro va'avodav el ha'am, Paro changed his mind. He and his people changed their minds. Vayamru mazot asinu ki shilachnu es Yisrael me'avdeinu. What in the world did we do? Yes, it's true. we sent them out. I'm not denying that. But what a mistake. You know, who's going to build for us now? How's our economy going to survive this tragedy? So there is this sense, and anybody could have said this, there is the sense that, okay, once the threat of death is not hanging over Paro, once the Paro was himself a Bechor, once I don't have to worry that Makas Bechoros is going to continue, I step back and I say, well, you know, in the pressure of the moment, I thought to send the Jews out. And what's fascinating in the Pasuk is that all the people, right? Originally the people were in favor of sending Bnei Israel out, and Paro was not. And all the people said, you know, let's just get rid of these people, it's terrible for us. But Paro was not. And here you have all of them changing their minds. So the first part, Vayugad l'melech Mitzrayim ki varach ha'am, it's a famous Rashi. He says, Ikturin shalach imahem. Paro sent spies with the Jewish people. V'kevan shehigiu ad shloshet yamim shekavu leilech v'lashuv. And when 3 days expired, again, this is just something that we don't even remember because we're quite sure that Moshe Rabbeinu said that, but the intention was, and certainly the Pshuto Shel Mikra is, Paro knew they were never coming back. They weren't going for 3 days. That's a whole discussion that we could have another time about what was the point of the 3-day charade that Moshe played with Paro. But here the fact is, says Rashi at least, that he sent spies with them. When after 3 days they didn't return, V'ra'u sheinam chozrim l'Mitzrayim, and he saw they were never coming back. Chazru v'higidu l'Faro b'yom ha'revi'i. On the 4th day, they came and told Paro, hey, the Jews aren't keeping their word. Chamishi v'shishi radfu acharhem. So the 5th and the 6th day, Paro chased after the Jewish people, and the distance that they had gone in the first 4 days, obviously Paro on horses and chariots and what have you, was able to cover that ground much more quickly. Leil Shivi'i Yardu Layam, on the 7th day of their leaving Mitzrayim, they went to Yam Suf. Bishacharit Amru Shira, in the morning of the 7th day, they said Shirat Hayam, V'hu Yom Shvi Shel Pesach, and that is the 7th day of Pesach. Lekach Anu Korin Hashira B'Yom Hashvi'i, V'zeu Lashon Rashi. Therefore, we read as Kriyas HaTorah on the 7th day of Pesach, Shirat Hayam, because that's when it happened. Okay, it's fascinating, and it seems completely the case. And yes, in fact, we do read Shirat Hayam on the 7th day of Pesach, and everything checks out. And the Ramban doesn't disagree. He just has a simpler pshat. V'chedu b'mechilta, says Ramban, Rashi got it from the Mechilta, it's all true. But he says, Val derech hapshat, on the simple reading of the Pasuk, Hu asher diber Hashem, V'amar Paro livnei Israel. God had predicted this. God knew what would happen, that Paro was going to say about Bnei Israel, Ki ka'asher asu kein Bnei Israel, v'shavu v'chanu lifnei piachirot lifnei Baal Tzifon. It's true. Says the Ramban, once Paro saw that Bnei Israel were meandering in the desert, right? The point was Moshe said, we know where to go to serve God. We're going to go there. We're going to come back. Once he saw that they didn't know exactly where to go, and they went back, v'shavu v'chanu lifnei piachirot, they walked backwards, they came to encamp before piachirot. Hugad zel melech Mitzrayim, it was told to Melech Mitzrayim, presumably by the ikutrikun, by the spies that he sent with them, v'amar ki barach ha'am, v'heim nevuchim b'midbar, v'einam holchim el makom yadu al lizbach. They're lost. It's not, what Moshe told them was not true. They're not going to a specific place to return. V'zeh tam u'bnei Yisrael yotzeim biyad Ramah. Bnei Israel left biyad Ramah. So we Ashkenazim, have the joke, biyad Ramah, we follow the Ramah. But she'asu lahem degel v'neis lehit noseis. They made a flag, meaning they're now not leaving as slaves. They're leaving as the Jewish people. There's a flag, they're rallying around the flag. V'yotzim b'simcha u'v'shirim b'tofu v'chinor. They're leaving with great joy, and with songs, and with musical instruments. This is a big celebration for them. Kidmut hanigalim me'avdut l'cheirut. Exactly as you would expect from people who are leaving from bondage to freedom. Lo ka'avadim ha'atidim lashuv la'avodatam. They didn't leave as slaves. Okay, we're getting a break. Let's go out quickly. No, They left with pride. They left triumphantly, not like slaves who are just getting a small break. V'chol zehu gadlo. So here's the same point twice in the Ramban. The original Ramban we saw at the beginning of the parsha said the same thing, that they were leaving with a sense of triumphalism. They were leaving with a sense of joy. They were leaving in a way not like avadim haborchim. And then the Ramban, that same idea appears in the Ramban in Vayugad l'melech Mitzrayim ki varach ha'am, that they left, with great joy and with great pride. And I don't think it really plays out in the question of were they holding their spears and their swords and shields in a way that people could see. I think it has to do more with the attitude. And I think when you think about it, Paro, in the midst of the pressure of the Makot, was willing to let them go, just let them go. But when they left in a way that almost, stuck it in Paro's face, when they left as winners, when they left with a sense that they're leaving with a purpose and with a joy and with a feeling of victory, maybe that was too much for him. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe that I'm mechazek et leiv Paro, there are all kinds of natural ways that can occur. And one of them is Vachamushim alu Bnei Israel me'eretz Mitzrayim, that they left with a sense of joy and a sense of pride and a sense of purpose, and they left as a free people. And perhaps that was more than Paro could take, and perhaps that was more than the Egyptians could take. And when they all changed their minds, they changed their minds, yes, because God made them change their minds. That's completely the case. But how did God make them change their minds? So you could say, it doesn't matter. It was a miracle. And that's certainly true. But I think the Ramban would say, when you look in the Psukim, you can see the things that helped Paro change his mind. And one of those things was the triumphant leaving of Bnei Israel kind of stuck it in his face. And it was more than he could take. And he thought to himself, this was a mistake and we should fix it. And it ended, for the Egyptians at least, and for the tragedy of Kriyas Yam Suf, and for us, the magic and the joy of the miracle of Kriyat Yam Suf. Okay, let's go on. After, the Shira is the Shira. We're not really going to do that now, although there were a lot of interesting Rambans. But after the Shira comes kind of, I don't want to say depressing, but a sad part of the parsha with a lot of complaining. And here we read as follows. Vayasa Moshe et Yisrael miyam suf vayetzu al midbar shuv vayelchu shloshet yamim bamidbar v'lo matzu mayim. There was no water, and they're thirsty. Okay, and then the miracle happens there. Vayitzak el HaShem vayoreu HaShem eitz vayashlech el hamayim vayimtuku hamayim. Okay, all that is part of the narrative, and it makes complete sense. Right? He gave him a tree, and the tree, even though the tree was bitter, they threw it into the water, and Moshe threw it into the water and sweetened the water. And then you have a phrase that doesn't really belong. Sham sam lo choku mishpat v'sham nisahu. That's where God gave them choku mishpat, and that's where God tested them. So the first pshat is Rashi's. It's famous. B'mara natan lahem miktzat parshiyot shel Torah sheyitasku bahem. In Mara, Moshe Rabbeinu, via HaKadosh Baruch Hu, gave them some parts of the Torah. What were the parts of the Torah? Says Rashi, Shabbos, Para Aduma V'dinim. Okay, the mitzvah of Shabbos, the mitzvah of Para Aduma, and the broad mitzvah of dinim, of interpersonal relationships. V'sham nisau la'am, and that's the end of Rashi. V'hi dad raboteinu, the Ramban says that's Chazal's idea. Okay, it makes complete sense. It reminds me, by the way, Rav Amital Zatzal once told us a story. He had spoken at a Kenes Tshuva, and afterwards a couple came over to him and said, we're not ready to take on Taryag mitzvahs yet. But can the Rav give us a suggestion for how we can get there eventually? And, me, I guess, I would have just said, no, it's all or nothing. But Rav Amital didn't say that. He told us, he said to them from this pasuk of Sham Sam Lo Chok Mishpat V'Sham Niso, that God gave them the parashas of Shabbos, Para Aduma, and Dinim. He said, you know what? There are three categories of mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs Bein Adam L'Chaveiro, right? So that, like Dinim, you should take on one of the mitzvahs Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. He said there are mitzvahs Bein Adam L'Makom, like Shabbos. You should take on one mitzvah Bein Adam L'Makom. Okay? And he said there are chukim. You should do one mitzvah that you don't understand. The only reason you're doing it, you should keep Shabbos, let's say, but the only reason you're doing it is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded you. Those are the three categories of mitzvahs that are found in Mara. Okay, that's Rav Amital and that's Rashi. But says the Ramban, Vani tamea. I don't get it. Lama lo piresh kan hachukim ha'ela v'hamishpatim. If God gave them mitzvos in Mara, so why does the Torah tell us? Why this strange lashon of sham sam lo choku mishpat? Just say it. Vayomer vayidaber Hashem Moshe tzabet bnei Israel v'amarta aleihem X. Give us the halacha. Kasher amar b'parshiot hanizkarot lemala dabru el kol adat bnei Israel lemor be'asar lachodesh hashvi'i v'yikchu lachem ish sel levet avot sel habayit. Why don't you just say something like that? If it's going to tell us a mitzvah, the Torah should tell us what the mitzvah is. V'chein yaseh b'chol hamitzvot ba'oel moed ba'arvot moav u'pesach midbar. Whenever the Torah gives us a mitzvah, it tells us what the mitzvah is. So now the Ramban has a fascinating pshat. He says, "V'lashon Rashi she'amar parshiot sheyitasku bahem." Says the Ramban, Rashi doesn't say the mitzvahs themselves. He says you have to be medayek in Rashi. He gave them parshiot shel Torah sheyitasku bahem. Mashma shehodiem hachukim hahem v'limed otam atid hakadosh baruch hu litzavot etchem bekach al haderech shel lamad Avraham Avinu et haTorah, etc. Unbelievable chiddush. Says the Ramban, we're reading Rashi wrong. Rashi's not saying that God gave us these mitzvos. Rashi's saying God gave us the Torah, those portions of the Torah, so that we could learn the Torah. We could learn about Shabbos. We could learn about Para Aduma. We could learn about Dinim. But they're not obligatory yet. They'll only become obligatory at Maimad Har Sinai. Just like, and it's a fascinating point, says the Ramban, what does it mean Avraham Avinu learned Kol HaTorah Kula? So the point he's saying here is, just like at Mara, it wasn't binding on Avraham Avinu. It doesn't become binding on the Jewish people until it's given as a command at Maimad Har Sinai. But that doesn't mean we can't be aware of it. It doesn't mean we can't have insight into God's will and into what God wants for us. But all in time. Avraham Avinu was osek in the Torah, says the Ramban. It doesn't mean that he was bound by the mitzvahs HaTorah. Just like at Marah, God gave us representative portions of the Torah for us to look at, for us to learn, but not as a command. It's kind of a test. God wants to see what our reaction is going to be to the types of things that we're going to get going forward. And very, very importantly, says Ramban, V'hu hanisayon she'amar v'sham nisahu. Right? Sham sam lo choku mishpat v'sham nisahu. Not so much a test, but to see what our reaction is. V'hodiem she'od yitzavim b'mitzvot. You want to know what's going to happen at Har Sinai? Here's a representative sample. And here you really hit the Rav Amital's idea is lovely. He gave them one chok, one mitzvah beinam l'chaveiro, one mitzvah beinam l'makom. And he told them, this is what the Torah looks like. V'zeu she'amayim shama tishma l'kol Hashem Elokecha v'hazanta l'mitzvotav asher yitzaveh otcha bahem. Right? This is what it's going to look like. V'al derech hapshat, kasher heichelu lavo b'midbar hagadol v'hanora v'tzimaon asher ein mayim, sam lahem b'michyasam v'tzarchehem minhagim asher yinhagu bahem od b'vom el eretz no shavet ki aminhag yikarei chok. God gave them mitzvos that really, really, really shouldn't become binding until they enter Eretz Yisrael, but they need to know in advance. They need to get some sense. If they're going to say Nasa v'nishma, they have to get some sense of what it is that their God wants of them and commands of them, and so they did so at Mara. And so says the Ramban's Chiddush is, even within Rashi, they didn't get the mitzvos then, they got the ideas behind it. They got the concepts that they learned so they'd have some sense when they got to Har Sinai of what it is that God wants. Now the Ramban has a third pshat. I'm skipping a few lines in the Ramban, but let's do this. He says, O shi yasreim b'chukei hamidbar, or, says the Ramban, it has a broader understanding. Not like Rashi says, Sham sam lo choku mishpat v'sham nisahu. He says, they are warned about what life is going to be in the midbar. Lispol hara'av v'hatzama. Right? There's going to be times where you're hungry. There's going to be times that you're thirsty. Likro bahem el Hashem lo derech tluna u'mishpatim They're supposed to cry out to God, but not in a whining kind of way, not in a complaining kind of way, in a way of acknowledging who God is and that we need things from Him. Sheyichyu bahem, how are they going to live? Le'ahov ish et re'ehu u'lehitaneg ba'atzat hazikenim, to love each other, to listen to the directions of the zikenim, v'atznei alechet, to live modestly, ba'alehem binyan hanashim v'hayiladim, right? Family life should be kept private. V'sheyinhagu shalomim haba'im b'machaneh limkor lahem davar. A strange line. When people come, as the Ramban imagines, to sell them things in the camp, they should be respectful. They should be nice. V'tochachot musar shalo yiyu k'machanot hashololim. They should live morally. They should aspire to moral lives. Asher yasu kol to'eva, right? All other military camps, all the people in the desert, they act immorally. It's an opportunity to act improperly. Says the Ramban, that's wrong. When you're camping in the midbar, it's more likely you'll feel free and not bound by morality and not bound by mitzvos. And here the Ramban, I'm sorry for saying that because I don't think it's mitzvos. Here the Ramban is emphasizing the importance of being good people, the importance of morality. And it's shocking. He says, one of the possible pshatim is sham sam lo chok mishpat v'sham niso. It's not Shabbos, it's not para aduma, it's not dinim. It's common sense. Moshe said to them, you're about to go into the midbar, you should know a few things. One, there will be times where you'll be hungry and there'll be times where you'll be thirsty. Feel free to daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but in a proper way, not in a disrespectful way, not in an angry way, not in a really needy way. But you're thirsty, you're hungry, you cry out to God and He'll provide. Be good to each other, be moral to each other, be modest, be nice to strangers. All the kinds of things that we have to live by and that the Ramban is going to make a bigger deal out of later on in the Torah. V'asita hayashar v'hatov b'nei HaShem. That's a famous Ramban. But in advance of that, says the Ramban, even in the midbar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu set them aside to tell them, if you want to be special people, if you want to be good people, act that way. Okay, that's the Ramban here. That's a significant Ramban in terms of, well, actually, if we go one more, there's another Ramban in Pasuk Chav Hey. When he's warning Bnei Israel, says the Ramban as follows. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's the next Pasuk. Vayilonu ha'amel Moshe lemo manishte, people one, vayitzak Hashem el Hashem vayireh Hashem eitz, no. Vayomer, next pasuk. Im shamoa tishma lekol Hashem elokecha, v'hayashar be'einav ta'aseh, v'ha'azanta lemitzvotav v'shamarta kol chukav, kol ha'ma'achala asher samti b'mitzrayim lo asim alecha, ki ani Hashem rofecha. What does it mean to listen to the words of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So we normally would think it means to keep the Torah. But here the Ramban again quotes in Ibn Ezra that he's going to agree with. Pirish Rabbi Avraham, lahavin tam ma sheyitzavcha la'asot, v'hayashar be'inav ta'aseh, mitzvah ta'aseh. It's a mitzvah to say, to do the right thing. V'azantala mitzvotav, mitzvah lo ta'aseh. Ubemichil ta'amru, v'hayashar be'inav ta'aseh, zeh masa'u matan. Being a good person means being an honest person. Dealing in business, in faith. Milamed shekol hanosei v'noten be'emunah v'ruach habriot nacha himenu ma'aleh alav hakatuv ki'ilu kiyem kol haTorah kula. Wow, shocking line. If you're a good person, says the Ramban, if people look at you and say, wow, who's his God? I want to join that religion because he's such a good person. I imagine that it's a religion of moral people. It's a religion of good people, as we are. So that's what it means. It's like you kept all Tarek mitzvos. Says Ramban, I'm going to explain all this later on when we get into Dvarim to the pasuk V'asita hayashar v'hatov, where the Ramban makes clear that hayashar v'hatov is not in the Torah. Hayashar v'hatov is not Shabbos. It's not Kibud Av Va'em. It's all the things that the Torah doesn't list, but that we know from learning Torah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu really wants. Right? We would say, even though it's a dangerous word to say nowadays, we would say morality. We would say being a good person. Yes, Sometimes there's a question of what would HaKadosh Baruch Hu want me to do in this situation. But the Ramban trusts us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us enough in the Torah to know that in situation X, he wants you to do X. And that's how we have to do. And that's shekula kilu kiyem kol Torah kula. This again is another Ramban focusing on morality, a big theme in the Ramban, a thing that we've seen before and we'll see again. It really, really matters, says the Ramban, how a person is, how a person behaves, how a person treats other people. Of course you have to eat matzah. Of course you have to keep Shabbos. Of course you have to take a lulav and esrog. But I don't want to say as importantly or more importantly. Equally importantly, says the Ramban, is you have to be a good person. And if you see a person and he's moral and he's fair and he's nice and he's kind, and you think to yourself, wow, I want to be like that person. All Jews are like that. I should be that way also. That's the Kiddush Hashem. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants of us in this world. Okay, let's do one last thing, but it's a fascinating one. Perek Tes Zayin, Pasuk Dalet. Says the Torah, Vayomu Alehem Bnei Israel, mi yitain, they're complaining again, Mutenu biyad Hashem be'eretz Mitzrayim b'shivtenu al sira b'asar b'achlin lechem l'sova, ki hotzeitem otanu el hamidbar hazeh la'amit et kol ha'kahal hazeh bara'av. And then, Vayomu Hashem el Moshe, finally, the answer is, Hineni mamtir lachem lechem min hashamayim, I'm going to make bread or food fall from the heavens. I want to test them. So what's the test? So really quickly, says the Ramban, Im yishmeru mitzvot hatluyot bo, shelo yotiru mimenu v'lo yetzu b'shabbat lilkot lashon Rashi. First Rashi. The test is all the halachos relating to the man. Says Ramban, ve'inenu nachon. It's more than that. Aval hu kmo shama ha'ma'achilcha man b'midbar shelo yadun avotecha leman anotcha leman nasotecha. It's inherent in the idea of man, some kind of test. Ki nisayon hu lahem shelo haya biyadam mazon v'lo yiru lahem eitza b'midbar rak haman shelo yadu mitchila v'lo shamu me'avotam. Says the Ramban, what are the rules of man? The rules of man are you can't take too much, and you can't leave over. What does that mean? He says, Lemaisa, says the Ramban, when you go to sleep at night, there's nothing in the pantry, there's nothing in the fridge, there's no food in the house. If a miracle doesn't happen tomorrow morning, you're going to starve. That's the test of the man. The man was set up to increase our dependence on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The man was set up to increase our appreciation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every single day, if we don't do it, something terrible is going to happen. And it's not as if we live in a world, or they lived in a world where lechem falls from Shamayim all the time. No one had ever seen this before. Not them, not their parents. Avraham Avinu didn't tell people, oh, by the way, God can make bread fall from the heavens. He can't. It doesn't happen. Ve'im kol zeh, shamu lalechet acharei Hashem lo makom lechem. And nevertheless, the people followed God into the midbar, a place where food doesn't grow. V'kacha amar lahem od v'zachatot kol haderech asher holichacha Hashem Elokecha zeh 40 shana b'midbar leman anotcha leman nasotcha ladat et Hashem b'levavcha tishma mitzvotavim lo. The purpose of man was to see if we trusted HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki haya lachol laholichem b'derech ha'arim asher svivotehem v'holichem b'midbar nachash saraf v'akrav. He could have taken, there was civilization, there were places they could have gone when they could have bought food. But he chose not to do that. I'm skipping a little bit. Right? Before the Akedah, says the Torah, take Yitzchak. The Ramban says it's not a test. God knows what's going to happen. What it is God tests people when he knows they're going to pass the test. And even though this is a down point for Bnei Israel, there's so much complaining going on, the Ramban thinks no. God gave them the test of the man to increase their amunah. He gave them an opportunity to, he knew it would happen. He gave them an opportunity to show that they're willing to go into the midbar, into a place where through natural means, they have no chance, zero opportunity for survival. But they do it anyway. And that shows their belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the nisayon. Every night to go to sleep, not knowing how you're going to feed your kids breakfast is a real nisayon. And that's the setup of the man. You're not allowed to save any food. You're not allowed to take more than you want. And also for yourself. I think for most of us who live in a time of plenty, there's only two amounts of food that we eat. Too much or too little. Right? I kept eating at night until it was too much for me, or I didn't have enough food to eat under some rare circumstance. But it's rare that we get it exactly right. And you're supposed to understand that the manna is, you could have more, but there's no need for more. And you teach yourself to be mistapek b'muat, not less calories than a human being needs. You're getting enough food. But you don't, I need dessert. Why do I need dessert? I don't know. So you don't have dessert. And you learn to live with that. That's a big, big part of belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so says the Ramban at the end, Leman anasenu is, I know they're going to pass. But what are they passing? It's not some random rules relating to man. It's the essence of the experience of receiving man, which was something no one had ever seen before. Okay, so we did 2 Rambans on how Bnei Israel left Mitzrayim triumphantly, joyously, in a way that maybe, made Paro regret his choice. We saw Choku Mishpat, fasting Ramban. It's not Shabbos, well, it might be Shabbos Dinim and Para Aduma, but they weren't binding then. It's just the idea that they learned the Torah, they got the Torah as a kind of an upcoming preview of what it's going to be like at Ma'amad Har Sinai. But the bigger Ramban there was, the possibility that Sham Samlo Choku Mishpat V'Sham Disau was morality. God told them they're going into the Midbar, they need to be good, they need to be caring, they need to be fine people, and that's what God wants for us. Same thing, Im Shama Tishma L'Kol Hashem Elokecha, that there is this concept in the Torah, although it's not written in so many words, of what God wants of us. And God wants us to be good people. Of course, He wants us to keep the Torah, but He wants us to be good people. And finally, the nisayon of the man, that it was set up so that there's never any extra, there's never any leftovers, there's nothing we could do. If a miracle doesn't happen tomorrow morning, we're going to starve, but thank God a miracle is going to happen. Okay, that's it for today. Shabbat Shalom, and see you, God willing, next week.